Yo, peace, Barghani, Islam, Salam, Hetepu, Rahubat, Gino Lakin Lunani, Chief Noble Bandele Elamine, back again for another video. Today's video, we're going to be dealing with Social Security and birth certificates. Okay, we're going to be talking about how you don't need either to get a passport. And we're going to show that, okay? Because a lot of people have, when they don't get your regular information, when you don't have these things, a lot of people tend to feel that it's impossible to do. So we're going to break down how you can get a passport without the birth certificate or social security number. Okay. So before we get any of that, please check out my books, Bandele Elamine, all my books on Amazon.com. I got a variety of books. We got one right here. It's the Birth Certificate Explained. And this actually is really got a lot to do with the information that we'll be dealing with in this video. So if you're, about to have a child, or you just had a child and you didn't get a birth certificate, or you're thinking about not getting one, this book is really a good book for you to understand that, especially if you're pregnant and you don't want to get a birth certificate, but you don't really know how to deal with it. This book is for you for sure. Okay, so we got this book, we got the Quran, we've got the Guide to Religious Marriage. Great book in showing you how to do a marriage without going through the state. The Indigenous Manual for Life. All these books, and the one that I appreciate, the Moorish treaties, the guided treaties, part 1, and there's another part 2 as well. So right here, part 2, right? And we also have the journal. So all you people who like to write down information still and like to jot it down, especially if you're taking notes, a lot of people like to take notes when they're writing on, learning all this information. This is a blank journal. It's got college rule lines, okay? It's the Afrocentric kente cloth style, cover. So, write down stuff, have your thing in culture and style and fashion. Write down, it can be used for spiritual journal. It can be used for your dream journal. It can be used for school or work. So however you need to do it, okay? Check it out. You can get the hardcover or the paperback. Get yours today on Amazon.com. So now let's get into the real deal. Let's get into the real information about birth certificates and social security numbers and how they're really you don't need them to get a passport. And the reason, it's really important to get a passport for a lot of people is because the passport really will show, there's no denying or any other higher identification in your country than the passport. And you show a passport in any state or, even out of the country, you're good. Even if you don't have any of those, if you don't have a birth certificate or a social security number, you be able to use that passport, really helps out a lot for people that don't have those documentation. But it's like, how can you get it? So this right here is going to show you. We're going to talk about social security number first, okay? Social security number. This article, it's written from a typical perspective, but they still give you the truth. So they're saying that, social security number isn't something that a baby is automatically given. So you understand that if you don't have a social security number, you don't have to get one. It's not something that you automatically have to give. They try to push this on you when you go in the hospital at birth, but it's not necessary. It is not something that you have to get then, okay? So we need to talk about, some websites tell you it's a great idea for privacy. That's dumb. Like I said, the opinion of why you don't have one is one thing. Lack of understanding can be part of this, why they write in this way. But for the fact that, not to be judgy, but it says that your baby might need it to function in society. We know this. A lot of times they say this, but that there are ways around, getting, opening a bank account or getting insurance or any of these things. A lot of times you can get around that. Now, if you're trying to get like, what is it? If you're trying to get like federal insurance, like, so if you're trying to get like what they call Obamacare and all that, yeah, you're going to need a social security number for that. They're not going to pretty much do that unless you get like an ITIN, which we'll get into that in another video. But that's hard to get. But so getting insurance, you can get insurance with a private company without a social security number, but it's very difficult to get insurance through the federal government without one, because the whole point of a social security number is social insurance. Okay, so we're not going to get into that. If you want to look at more, read the book. But with that said, right, it says if you haven't opted out, you might still find yourself without a social security number for your baby, or for a number of reasons. So perhaps, for example, the baby didn't get one in the hospital, or, so you need to go to the security office to apply, or maybe you adopted a child. Whatever the reasons are, you don't have one. And so it's saying whatever your situation may be, your baby does not need a social security number to get a passport. Do you hear that? Okay. And neither do you, for that matter. Okay. So however, if the baby or whoever the applicant is has a social security number, though, the U.S. government regulations of 22 U.S.C. 2714 and 22 CFR 51.60 requires you to provide a social security number. If you have one, when you apply for a U.S. passport or renewal of a U.S. passport, and if you fail to provide the information, you will encounter a delay in processing or the denial of your passport application. You will also be subject to a $500 penalty enforced by the IRS pursuant to sections 6039E of the Internal Revenue Code and 26 U.S.C. 6039E. All questions of this penalty should be directed to your nearest IRS office. Okay, so what's being said is that if you have a social security number to the name that you're trying to get a passport with, then you may get in trouble. You may have a $500 penalty. So please, if you have a social security number, please don't use that name that the social security number is attached to. Period. Okay? Period. So you understand that if your child does not have a social security number, you can apply for the passport. So let's look at the other part of it, because it's the birth certificate is also another part of the 1-2 punch, when it comes to early identification. So it said that here is like the need a new passport and don't have original birth certificate. So it's just saying that, you need this. Without that, if you're applying for a new U.S. state's passport, the U.S. government has strict policy that requires all new passport applicants to include proof of citizenship. Usually proof of citizenship is an original state-issued birth certificate with a raised seal or naturalization documentation. Okay. Now, this, like we said, this is not the only form. This is the first form of identification that they look for. If you do not have an original copy of your birth certificate or your child's birth certificate, there are a number of items that you can use to replace this essential proof of citizenship. Okay? Below is a list of acceptable documents to be used in the place of the birth certificate. If you are traveling soon, you need to get your passport fast, please contact them or whatever. Okay? But so now it's saying missing birth certificate passport requirements. Okay? Basically, early public records. So if you do not have original state issued birth certificate, you can submit your passport application and identification in combination of early public records as evidence of your U.S. citizenship. Early public records must be submitted with a birth record or letter of no record. Okay. So we're going to get into that because one of the things that you can do, and this is also what you can do for your social security number, is you write a letter of no record. So we're going to look at that, and that's going to be used for both purposes. Early public records show your name, date of birth, place of birth, and preferably be created within the first 5 years of your life. That's why it's important for you to get this done sooner than later, for you to get an affidavit or some kind of record. So one of them, the first one is the baptismal certificate. The baptismal certificate is a religious document. The baptismal is talking about how you're either baptized, and when you're baptized, it will tell you you were baptized on this day at this age. So that's a record of age right there. Okay, so that's religious. Remember that. So that's what we basically use religious documentation that would be similar to a baptismal. And understand, baptismal is for Christian. It's a Christian term. So, Muslims or whatnot may not have a baptismal, okay, because we're talking about John the Baptist, but they have the equivalent of hospital birth certificate. If you got a hospital birth certificate, it can be the unofficial one, like what the hospital gave you. That can be also used. The census record can be used. Early school record. And look, once again, religious again, because your family Bible record. So if you have a family Bible record or a religious book that you put it in as a record, that can be used as well. And then also the doctor record or postnatal care. So also when you're trying to, like when you have a doctor or at a hospital, if you had a child in the hospital, and even if you didn't have it in the hospital, if you had the child by a midwife, you can use the doctor's record from the hospital or the midwife. Midwives most likely have put your information in one of the hospitals that they work for or work with. Okay, so even if you've gone to the doctor, the child's gone to the doctor, after it's been born. A lot of times you got to get checkups, or for whatever reason, you can use those records from your immediate doctor as record. Okay, so there's a lot of other things you can use. Keep in mind that submitting an early public record is not acceptable on its own. It must be submitted with a combination of other records. Okay, so understand that you can use. So if you've got more than one of those type of, you want more one of them. You might need the baptismal and definitely a hospital birth certificate, maybe if you have that. Any of these on here, But I know, like if a child, usually if you're doing this for a child that's before they go on to school, your best bet is to get the doctor's record and a baptismal certificate. Okay, and those are the things that we supply. We give baptismal certificates. We give affidavits of religious affidavits of live birth. So any of those things could be used as a tool. Okay. What's a letter of no record? What's a letter of no record? A letter of no record. If you were born in the United States and do not have a birth certificate because you don't have a previous passport or a U.S. birth certificate of any kind, you must instead submit a state-issued letter of no record that includes, boom, your name, your date of birth, years for which a birth record was searched, the years for which a birth record was searched, and acknowledgement that no certificate was found on file. A letter of no record must be submitted together with those other records as described above. Okay, so given a record, you're saying, hey, I have no record. Now, they're saying a state issued letter of no return. So what that means is, in some instances, if you can go to your vital statistics and ask them to show if you have record. Sometimes they will have if you had a child that was born and you have the mother name, like a lot of times that they'll put the child's mother's last name and they'll put baby boy last name and they'll have the mother's name on record. They will maybe file that with the vital statistics. So if you go in there and they're asking you, well, what's the child's name? You don't have one. But if you say with the mother's name, it may pull up that record and say, well, this is what they have on record. So you have to be careful when you're doing these things with the vital statistics. But other than that, you can write a letter and an affidavit with the same information as with sworn penalty of perjury, okay, on that and get it notarized. So that's what you would need to do. A letter of no record must be submitted with with the early public records. We said it. The DS form. This is the birth affidavit form for the Department of the State Secretary of State. Okay, when you don't have a birth certificate, you need to fill this out. So if you're born in the United States and don't have a birth certificate, submit your passport application. You must submit the form DS10 or a birth affidavit as evidence of the U.S. citizenship. So that's why we give an affidavit of live birth. So you don't necessarily have to do a DS10. But if you don't have an affidavit of live birth, then you most likely need to do a DS10. And you see it must be notarized, submitted in person. Must be submitted together with the other records. Must be completed by somebody who has personal knowledge. So usually if it's a child, it's your mother or father or someone of the like. Okay, must state briefly how the affiant's knowledge was required. It should be completed by older blood relative. So that's why we say mother or father. Okay, if you don't have a blood relative, you need to find somebody else, like a physician, somebody who else recognizes you. Okay, so these are the main things. So let's look at the DS10 real quick. Okay, I'm just going to look at the DS10. It says that this form is used when no birth certificate exists for a person born in the United States or when a U.S. birth certificate was filed more than a year after the birth. This form or a written statement that includes all of the information on this form must be filled out by a close blood relative or who has personal knowledge of the details of the passport applicant's birth, or by a person who was personally involved in the passport application's birth. For example, your physician. Okay, so once again, this is on the actual document. This is the instructions. So let's look at, and y'all can go back and just pause this and look at it, but let's go back and look. So basically, you got to put the person's name, first and last, their information, okay, applicant's place of birth, city and state, passport applicant's date of birth, okay, current home, okay, nothing major, okay, basic stuff. Okay, submit a photocopy in the back of valid ID presented by the agent. Okay, so you know, having an ID, you may need an ID, a religious ID. It's saying what kind of ID you got. You know, for a child, they won't have a driver's license, they won't have a passport, and they won't have a military ID. So what's the other ID they can have? Would be a religious ID. So you specify religious ID number. You give the information. So you use a religious ID. Okay, or your nationality ID. If you got, like, a lot of Moors have the nationality ID, but we have a membership ID, or you have an ID of birth. We have a birth ID. That's for religion, a religious ID. Okay, all those things would be able to work. Okay, and you sign off, and that's it. So, just want you guys to see that, you know, it wouldn't be that hard. It's easy to do, and simple for you to follow the directions. If you have any problems, you can always go back and look at it again. You can always get in contact with us if you need any more information. Okay, and please feel free to use the website and look through it to find out other information. There's a lot of information on the website. So appreciate it. We'll be having more exclusive videos that are only on the website coming soon. So until then, Tuta Nana, peace.